I took a job I thought was going to be simple. My buddy Chris told me about it. He'd been working the night shift at a local campaign office, and he said they needed more help. The pay was decent, and honestly, I needed something to fill my time since my regular job had cut back hours. It was an easy gig, according to him. Just keep an eye on things, log any updates, make sure no one messes with the equipment, and occasionally enter data. Seemed straightforward enough. The campaign office was set up in this old Victorian house on the outskirts of town. It looked like it had been around since the 1800s, with chipped paint, creaky wooden floors, and a vibe that just felt off. I didn't care much about the election or politics, but money's money, right? The first couple of nights were uneventful. I sat in a little corner room with my laptop, inputting data, mostly names and addresses for voter registrations. The office was dark and quiet. The other employees worked during the day, so I was alone at night. Around 2 a.m. every night, though, the phones would ring. All of them, at the same time. There were at least 10 phones scattered around the office, landlines, which was weird enough in itself. They'd all start ringing, and it wasn't a normal ring either. It was almost like it was reversed, like the sound was playing backward. The first time it happened, I nearly jumped out of my chair. I tried to answer one, but there was just static on the other end. Except, through the static, I could hear something faint, like chanting. But it didn't sound like English or any language I recognized. Maybe it was a prank, or just a glitch in the system. I mean, it's an old building, right? Weird things happen. The strange part was, whenever I checked the voter registration system afterward, there were new names added. I hadn't entered them, and I knew no one else had access during my shift. The names would appear for a few minutes, then disappear. I thought maybe I was just seeing things or the system was buggy, but I started writing the names down, dozens of them. And the addresses? None of them were real. They were either empty lots, abandoned buildings, or places that didn't even exist on the map. I brought it up to Chris. He just laughed and said, "Oh man, this place is old. Stuff like that happens all the time. Don't worry about it." I didn't press the issue, but it kept bothering me. Then one night, I decided to explore the building a bit more during my break. There was a basement I hadn't checked out yet. The stairs creaked under my weight, and the air down there felt colder than upstairs. I found a door at the back of the basement, which was locked. But the weird thing was, there was light seeping through the cracks, like someone had left a lamp on behind it. I couldn't contain my curiosity, so I jimmied the door open with a screwdriver I found lying around. Inside, I found a bunch of old maps. They were rolled up, dusty, and covered in weird symbols and markings. But what freaked me out the most was the dates. The maps were for future construction projects, highways, buildings, parks. But the dates were for 2036. I tried calling Chris again to ask if he knew about the maps, but his phone went straight to voicemail. This was strange because I'd spoken to him earlier that same day, and now he wasn't answering my texts or calls. When I went back upstairs, all the windows in the office were covered. I don't know when it happened, but every single one of them was blocked out with black paper or something, and there were flickering lights behind them, like someone was shining a flashlight from outside. But when I went out to check, the street was completely empty. I started feeling like I was losing my mind, but it got worse. The voter database I was working on, the numbers didn't make sense. The district polling numbers were mathematically impossible. More votes registered than actual people who lived in the area. I ran the data multiple times, but it was always the same. And those names, they kept coming back, disappearing just as quickly, like they were ghosts in the system. At this point, I was freaking out. Something wasn't right about this place, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. I packed up my stuff and decided I was done. I texted Chris that I was quitting, but still no reply. As I was leaving, I heard the phones ring again. It was that same reversed sound, but this time it was louder, like all the phones were turned up to max volume. And then I heard it, the numbers. It wasn't just static anymore. Through the phone, in that eerie, backwards chanting, I heard sequences of numbers. They kept repeating, like some kind of code, 538. Over and over again, those numbers. I didn't know what they meant, but the sound of them made my skin crawl. I rushed out of the office and didn't look back. The next day, I tried looking up Chris. I went to his place, but no one had seen him for days. His apartment was completely empty, like he had vanished. I even went to the campaign office during the day to see if anyone knew where he was, but they acted like they didn't even know who he was. That's when I knew something much bigger was going on. A week later, the election results came in. The candidate I had been working for won by a landslide, with numbers that almost exactly matched the impossible figures I had seen in the system. I already knew the results before they even announced them. It was like I had seen the future. And now every night, even though I quit, I still hear that phone ringing in my dreams. And those numbers 538, they keep playing in my head, like a countdown I can't escape. There's something wrong with that office, something beyond politics or corruption, something dark. And I fear whatever it is, it's not done with me yet. I wish I could say things got better after I quit, but they didn't. If anything, it got worse. A few days after I left the job, I noticed things happening around my apartment. It started small, like lights flickering or my phone acting up, but it didn't take long for it to escalate. I'd be lying in bed at night, half asleep, and I'd hear that same sound, the reversed ringing of the phones. But it wasn't coming from a phone anymore. It was like the sound was in my walls, in the air around me. Sometimes I'd wake up to it, and the numbers, 538, would be echoing in my head like they were being whispered into my ear. I started checking the news obsessively, trying to see if there was any explanation for what I had found at the office. But every time I tried looking up the election results, voter numbers, or anything related to the campaign, my computer would crash, or the page wouldn't load. It was like something was blocking me from finding the answers. I thought about going to the police, but what could I tell them? That I was haunted by numbers and phone rings? That I found maps dated decades into the future in a creepy old basement? They'd think I was crazy. One night, I woke up around 3 a.m. to a banging sound from the living room. My heart sank because I knew I had locked all the doors and windows. The banging continued, like someone was pounding on the walls, growing louder and more frantic. I grabbed my phone and tiptoed into the hallway. As I got closer, I saw that the light in my living room was flickering, just like in the office when the windows were covered. But there was no one there. I stood frozen in the doorway, watching as the light flickered in and out, my breath catching in my throat. Then from behind me, I heard it, 538. A voice, clear as day, whispered right into my ear. It wasn't static anymore, and it wasn't the phones. It was right there, as if someone was standing inches behind me. I spun around, but no one was there. That was the moment I realized whatever this was, it had followed me home. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. The numbers kept playing in my head over and over again, and I felt like I was losing it. I started seeing things out of the corner of my eye, shadows darting across the walls, flickers of movement just beyond my vision. I'd hear the same reversed phone ringing sound from time to time, but when I'd go to check, my phone would be off or not even in the room with me. Desperate, I decided to go back to the office. Maybe I could find something that would explain what was happening. When I arrived, the place looked different. The windows that had been covered were now boarded up, and the door was padlocked. I tried calling the number for the campaign office, but it was disconnected. There was no sign that anyone had worked there, let alone that it had been a busy political campaign hub just a few weeks before. It was like the place never existed. I thought about breaking in, but the last thing I needed was to get arrested for trespassing. So instead, I went home. But as I was driving back, I got a text message. It was from Chris. My hands were shaking as I opened it, expecting it to be some kind of explanation, some answer to everything that had happened. All it said was, "Don't look for me, stay away." That was the last time I ever heard from Chris. Since then, I've tried to forget. I really have. I moved to a new apartment, got a different job, and tried to put the whole thing behind me. But every once in a while, late at night, I still hear that damn ringing. And those numbers, 538, they never left me. I don't know what they mean. I don't know if I'll ever know. All I know is that the election results came out exactly as I predicted. The candidate won, and everything went off without a hitch, just like it was planned years in advance. It's like someone, or something, knew how it would play out all along. And I can't shake the feeling that whatever it was I stumbled into, it's not over, not yet. It wasn't just the phone calls and numbers. After that last message from Chris, things started getting a lot weirder and darker. I tried to shake off the feeling that something was following me, but there were moments where I was absolutely sure of it, like the time I went out for groceries. I was in the frozen food aisle, reaching for a bag of veggies, when I saw a reflection in the freezer glass. Someone was standing right behind me. My heart almost stopped, but when I turned around, no one was there. At first, I thought it was just stress or paranoia playing tricks on me. I mean, that's what made sense, right? But then, it happened again. I started noticing it all the time, in reflections, in shadows, or sometimes even just out of the corner of my eye, and always at the same time, around 2 a.m. At one point, I couldn't take it anymore. I went to the basement of my new building, looking for something to distract me, to ground me back in reality. But when I got down there, I found something I can't explain. There, in the middle of the cement floor, was a single piece of paper. It wasn't old or torn. It looked like it had just been printed. When I picked it up, my stomach dropped. It was one of the maps I'd found back at the campaign office. The same exact map with the same future construction projects dated 2036. But there was something new on this one. Something circled in red, my current address. I dropped it and ran back upstairs. By the time I got to my apartment, I was out of breath, my hands shaking so badly I could barely open the door. When I finally got inside, I locked every bolt and put a chair under the handle for good measure. I tried to tell myself it was just a coincidence, that maybe someone was messing with me. But deep down, I knew better. The numbers were still everywhere. 538. I saw them on license plates, on receipts, in random places that shouldn't have meant anything. But they did. Every time I saw them, it felt like a warning, like a countdown to something I couldn't understand, but knew was coming. And the worst part? Every time I tried to talk about it to someone, they'd just look at me like I was crazy. I knew I wasn't. One night, after the ringing had kept me up for the third night in a row, I decided to dig deeper into the maps. I went online, trying to research if any of the planned projects were real. I didn't find much at first, just vague city planning stuff, nothing about the specific details I had seen. But then I found something, a small forum for urban planners, buried deep in the search results, where people were discussing future developments. One post in particular caught my eye. It was dated from 1999, and it mentioned a shadow campaign that influenced urban planning decisions well into the future. The poster claimed that the elections were being rigged, not just politically, but geographically. They talked about manipulating city layouts, gerrymandering districts so subtly that no one noticed. But there was a part that gave me chills. They mentioned that certain construction projects were set to happen decades in advance, and that the numbers 5 and 38 were being used as some kind of code. A code for what? I didn't know, but it all lined up too well to be a coincidence. I saved the post and closed my laptop, sitting there in silence for a few minutes, trying to process it all. That's when I heard it again, the phone ringing. Only this time it wasn't coming from my phone. It was coming from my laptop. I stared at the screen as it rang, just like the phones in the office. Reversed, eerie, and relentless. The screen flickered, and for a split second, the voter registration page popped up on my screen. Only this time, it wasn't the old database I had been working on. It was updated. It showed my name, my address, and it listed me as deceased. I slammed the laptop shut. What the hell was going on? I needed answers. I couldn't live like this anymore. I had to know what had happened to Chris and why he disappeared, why all of this started in the first place. But no one at the campaign office would help me, and the police didn't care. They treated it like a missing person case, but something told me they weren't going to find him. Not in the way they were looking. So I decided to take matters into my own hands. I returned to the office. It was broad daylight this time, and the building looked as decrepit as ever. I broke in through a back window, determined to find something that would explain all of this. Maybe those maps were still there, or maybe there was something else, something I had missed. The place was even creepier in the daylight. The air was heavy, thick with dust, and there was this overwhelming sense of being watched. As I made my way to the basement, I noticed something that hadn't been there before. Footsteps in the dust, leading straight to the locked door where I'd found the maps. My hands trembled as I approached the door. The same screwdriver I used the first time was still there, resting on the floor like it was waiting for me. I pried the door open, and what I saw inside stopped me cold. The room was completely different. Instead of dusty shelves and old boxes, the room was filled with electronic equipment, servers, monitors, cables running across the floor like veins. And there in the center of the room was a massive screen displaying rows and rows of names, voter names. It was the same database I had worked on, only this time I could see the manipulation happening in real time. Names were being added and deleted by the second, addresses changing, numbers fluctuating. I watched as a name was added, Chris's name, but it didn't list him as a campaign worker. It listed him as a voter, and next to his name was the word void. My stomach churned. I scrolled through the list, my hands shaking as I searched for my own name. When I found it, I nearly threw up. There it was, in black and white, next to the word deceased. My name, my address, my details, all filed away like I was already dead. I staggered back, knocking into one of the servers, and that's when the screen changed. The numbers appeared again, 538, only this time they were everywhere, flashing in every corner of the screen, repeating over and over in that reversed, otherworldly sound. Then the lights went out. I was plunged into darkness, the only light coming from the faint glow of the numbers on the screen. I could hear something in the distance, like footsteps echoing through the halls, but they weren't heavy footsteps. They were soft, slow. I froze, listening. Whatever it was getting closer. I didn't wait to find out what it was. I bolted out of the basement, my feet barely touching the stairs as I ran. The air in the house felt oppressive, like the walls were closing in on me. I could still hear the footsteps behind me, echoing faster now, as if something was giving chase. I burst out the front door and didn't stop running until I reached my car. My hands shook as I fumbled with the keys, desperate to get away. When the engine finally roared to life, I sped out of there without looking back. That was 3 days ago. Since then, I haven't left my apartment. The ringing has gotten worse. It's constant now, no matter where I am. Even when I turn my phone off, I can still hear it, as if it's coming from inside my head. And the numbers, they're always there. Every time I close my eyes, I see them flashing in the darkness. I don't know how much longer I can take this. I don't know what's happening, but I know it's not over. I think whatever I found, whatever I uncovered, it was never meant to be seen. And now it's coming for me. If you're listening to this, don't look for me. Don't try to help. Just stay away from the campaign office. And if you ever hear the sound of a phone ringing late at night, don't answer it.
Please subscribe for more stories.